that'd be great.
Okay. Okay, hi everyone. My name's Alice Hathorn. I'm just a volunteer convener of a small project, environment project in the suburb of Weston. And I just want to tell you a little bit about it. This is where it's located. It's between Withers Place, Booverlow and Foal Street. It's probably a little over half a hectare. In 2019, I sort of just made an inquiry about what was obviously a weed, because there was a lot of it. And that turned out to be African lovegrass, which you can see in the photo there, which you may have heard of, which is an ecologically transforming weed. And that's significant because it means that it makes fundamental changes to the landscape, the nutrient profile of the soil. Birds can't eat the seeds or use it to build their nests. It's also highly flammable. It'll burn a metre above its own canopy, as opposed to the native grasses, which cure a lot later in the summer. So they hold on to moisture for longer and they burn at a much lower temperature. So when this project began, after I made that inquiry, I started reading a few ecology. I was just interested. I started reading a few ecology journals and then I had trouble putting them down. And that sort of led to me wanting to understand what was originally out there in this park, basically, because I thought, oh, well, it's obviously there's something wrong because it's covered in this weed, but what would we do to fix it? So as I started reading, I found myself reaching out to the ACT Environment Planner at the time, Michael Mulvaney, and then some of the academics who'd actually written some of the work that I was reading. And I had a dendrologist out to age the trees. There are some mature trees I discovered from the original woodland that still remain in this little park. And once I'd read that material, I suppose I realised that I didn't look at our landscapes here in the urban environment in the same way. What I saw were, I was looking at them through a different lens. I saw just declining landscapes. And this is really just a list of the reasons why, based on the material I'd read, I believe that why they're declining, really. So poor management, including removal, obviously, of mature trees, which you would have heard about, because huge numbers of them have been removed from the landscape. And I'll explain why that's significant later. Fragmentation of the landscape, which basically means obstacles that we put in the way of natural processes like the movement of seed and the movement of animals and so on. We've changed our soils and the way water, so hydrological processes, how water moves across the landscape. And of course, we've removed the original plant community from under the trees, the original trees, which has an impact on their health, amongst other things. Whenever timber falls to the ground, we take it away, even though leaving it there performs really important functions, not just for insect life, which I'll talk about a little later, but also because that's really important in trapping moisture and returning carbon to the soil. And the more carbon there is in soil, the more water it can hold generally. And then, of course, we engage in high frequency mowing with really heavy machines, which compacts the soil and creates conditions that really, extreme conditions that only, weeds like African lovegrass can tolerate. So I mentioned fragmentation, and I'll just see if I can get this little video to work. Hopefully you can see that, and if you can't, I'll describe it to you. Oh, it may not. So this video, it may not load. In case it doesn't load, I'll just describe it to you. So basically, it's a video of a possum, and it's young, walking along a metal fence. So, a lot of the metal fencing that people are putting up now. Here we go. It's just come up. This is probably my download that's causing the issue. I'm not sure if you can see that. Are you able to see that?
Yes, we've got it.
You are? All right.
Yes.
So I'm not sure if that, so hopefully what you can see is a female possum with its young walking along the top of this metal fence. And that's the young one just reaching, it's obviously grabbed something, but you can sort of see over time, you can sort of see in this video that the animal is trying to work out, it can walk along the top of this fence, but it's trying to work out how it's going to get past this area. So, with that a timber fence, it's evolved with nails to be able to climb up and down it. But of course, the metal, precludes the animal. So that's just a little example of what fragmentation does, how it sort of impedes natural movement across the landscape. Let's go back to the, sorry, okay. Okay, so key factors integrated urban landscapes. Well, as I'm sure would come as no surprise to a community council, there's overdevelopment and poor planning, which exacerbates fragmentation. Often our local plants don't get a lot of attention, so we plant a lot of exotics, and many of them are beautiful, but they don't perform key functions. So for example, exotic plants need higher nitrogen and more phosphorus than our local plants do. And when we pump more nitrogen and phosphorus into the soil, that winds up to try and keep those exotic plants alive, that winds up in our waterways. And in fact, the exotic plants themselves will break down and actually alter the soil nutrient profile in their own favour. I remember reading that over 90% of insects don't recognise exotic plants as food. And of course, they're food for a lot of animals. So it's not surprising that without them, once we interrupt that process, that a lot of other species go into decline. And as I mentioned earlier, of course, we damage our local hydrology. So we take water away effectively which is really, I suppose, you know, what happened wherever the English went, you know, we redirect water and we send it into stormwater sumps and then we dump it in the Molonglo. And so we're taking water that's designed to remain in the landscape and we're taking it somewhere else. So biodiversity is a term that's used really frequently now, but I've just included a quick definition of that. But what's important about it is about the variety of all living things. But what's significant about that is that variety is a measure of the health of our environment. And the reason it matters is because it's all about function. So the less biodiversity we have in the landscape, the less function we can look forward to. And often I'll say to people that environments are made up of jobs performed by a variety of forms of life, and they all co-evolve to depend on each other. And our local biodiversity, as I've learned, is really beautiful, and that's because it works. It performs functions, key functions, and our survival depends on those functions, even in city areas. And ultimately, this environment moved very slowly over millions of years. And I remember reflecting one day that we can do so much damage in just a few hours with just with a residential lawnmower and a whippersnipper. And so the reason I make that point is because disruption is a key part of the damage that we're doing to the landscape, as well as what we plant and how we plant it. So the key plant community where we live, two key plant communities where we've built our homes, natural temperate grassland and boxgum woodland. And in this little park that we've been restoring, it was originally part of the boxgum woodland landscape. And I just thought I'd tell you a little bit about that. So for those who are unaware, it's a critically endangered plant community now, but it was open woodland. So about 30% canopy cover. And the reason that's significant is because we never got enough rain for dense forest. I think I may have mentioned earlier, the co-dominant species are yellow box and Blakely's red gum. And they are so significant, these eucalypts, that they are referred to as keystone species by ecologists. And one of those key functions is to provide hollows for native wildlife to nest and live. And this process takes, for the larger hollows, for parrots, takes 180 to 220 years. And then what we would have found if we could go back 200 years is sort of a beautiful understory of incredibly biodiverse sort of meadow. So if we could go back 200 years and draw a square metre, we would have found over 40 species of native plant were present in that square metre. And this is just a map of how dominant this boxgum woodland plant community was. It stretched, as you can see, all the way up to the south of Queensland. And I spoke earlier about structure, and the reason that's really significant is because where we live and this sort of open woodland structure refers to how many trees, the age of the trees, and how they're positioned in the landscape. And so we had scattered trees across the landscape and mid-layer shrubs, often wattles, that perform really important functions. And then this really biodiverse understory. And if you think theoretically about the way different creatures move across the landscape, that structure is really fundamental. They've evolved to be able to move across that kind of landscape. So insectivorous birds, for example, need these open areas to be able to hunt insects. So I'll just show you what's actually happening on the ground here now. So what you're looking at now is the original state of this park. And what you can see on your left with the single tree is a Blakely's red gum that's been aged at over 300 years. And then on the right-hand side, you can see a cohort of Blakely's that are over 200 years. And then in the back, very back, hopefully you can see there in the back corner, there's a yellow box that's been aged at over 200 years. So the issues facing this particular park were a massive invasion of lovegrass, declining bird and insect life, shrinking tree canopies, soil erosion and compaction. When it rained, the water would just simply run over the top of the soil. So the soil was really hydrophobic and of course, very hot and dry conditions in the summer. So the aim of this project, which if I didn't mention before, I applied for an environment grant, which is just a very small one to fund it. So we obviously had to address the weed issue, re-establish the original plant community, understory and midstory, reverse soil loss because we had a lot of erosion taking place, and that meant changing the way, remediating how water moved across the landscape and returning carbon to the soil. Of course, leaving fallen timber, not only for habitat and insect life, but also to return ultimately carbon to the soil. And then importantly, to encourage people to return native biodiversity to their local gardens, because the science shows that without the gardens, the parks will not survive. So these little photos are from the park. We get gangs every day. They come to visit, and you can see the female with the sort of the bronze striped breast there. She's perched on a hollow, which we don't know a lot about gangs, but we know that that hollow would not be adequate for her to raise any chicks. Whereas the male with the red head on the other side there, he's perched on a limb that came down from the oldest Blakely, and that one is of a diameter once it sort of hollows out, which of course takes time. And that's one of the distinguishing feature with our wildlife. Our eucalypts we have hard, the timber is very dense. And so our birds can't excavate hollows. They have to wait for this long process of deterioration where fungus and water helps to form these hollows. They're dependent on that. So here I've included this because, as well as the loss of mature and hollow bearing trees being a key threatening process in the ACT and elsewhere, the regenerating saplings are also, the loss of those is also a key threatening process. So in this photo, I ran around and sort of pegged the regenerating saplings, and I'm not sure if you can see, but there's a little magpie that would have been from 2019, and that's a baby magpie. And even these regenerating saplings, which will never get to full height, perform important functions. Not only are they a host to a lot of insect activity, but they also provide little structures in the landscape for example, for the baby magpie to hide from the eyes of predators. And in the normal course of events, of course, these are all mown down, where the natural process is that they should regenerate. And here is just an example of some of the beautiful flora from the boxgum woodland that we've now returned to the project. So we've returned over 100 of the original native plant species. You might recognise some of them. The purple flowering pea, or I think is often called happy wanderer, and that little yellow paper daisy, or Xerochrysum viscosum, which is accommodating a couple of native bees that hopped on there almost the moment that I put it in. And this is some of the wildlife that uses the park. I love the photo of the baby possum because it's on a 300-year-old limb there on the oldest red gum, and the tawny frogmouths, of course, that are a big favourite. I've included the magpies because one of the interesting observations we made was that they spent very little time in the park normally, but as the restoration began, they started to teach their young how to hunt, because of course there was food available all of a sudden. Because you'll recall the original photos were so bleak, there was really nowhere to hide and nothing to eat. And the photo of the butterfly, that's a common blue, one of our local native butterflies. And the significance of that is that butterflies can be a very good indicator of the health of an ecosystem. And so we use that as a benchmark. And since the project began, and it's really only just almost 3 years old now, we've documented the return of 11 species of native butterfly, which represent 10% of all of the native butterflies in our region, actually. And the little white-browed scrub wren, I've included that one because the presence of, because small native birds have really, woodland birds have really been hit hard. And part of the reason for that, apart from loss of habitat, is also that we've created an imbalance. And so we have too many predatory birds, like say currawongs, that are spending, they're native, but there are many more of them. And part of that is driven by the lack of mid-structure in the landscape. So there's really nowhere for these little birds to hide. And we've documented now over 40 species of native bird that have been documented as visiting the park, and now quite a number of small bird species, which is very encouraging. So I'll just show you quickly some of the after shots. So you can sort of see here that this is the Fole Street Park that you saw the photos of earlier, and we've got the return of some structure here. This is spring last year, because we had a sort of a year of drought and then a year of rain, and so this spring last year was obviously very rewarding, and it obviously looks very different. Yeah, everything just sort of took off, and all the work that we put in really started to pay off. And that's what, and we've sort of been able to document a lot of insect activity, significant changes in the soil profile, I'm almost at the end of that now. So I just thought I'd tell you a couple of interesting stories from the park. So I mentioned butterflies. So what we found was that there's a native clover. It's an oxalis, and you can see it pictured there in the bottom corner of this slide. So the checkered copper butterfly co-evolved with this particular oxalis, and also with a species of Iridomex ant. The ant makes its nest at the base of the oxalis, and the butterflies lay their eggs under the leaves of this oxalis, and the caterpillars eat the leaves and flowers of this oxalis. And what happens is that you need all three, so they have a really interesting relationship. Basically, the ants come up when the caterpillars hatch, and they care for the butterflies, believe it or not, for the caterpillars. They basically take them out to eat during the day and then take them into their nest at night. And ultimately the caterpillars form a chrysalis, and after about 12 days they emerge as an adult. And it was very exciting because we actually we identified the existence of this relationship in the park. There are some close shots here that were taken by a group in South Australia who have also similarly been documenting this relationship. And so you can sort of see the ants there, and you can see the eggs under the leaves. And they were able to take, which I wasn't, just a wonderful, and hopefully you'll be able to see this now, but this is actually footage of the checkered copper larvae being attended to by these ants. And what they think is happening is that the ants are releasing a sweet exudate, which benefit, the caterpillars are releasing a sweet exudate that benefit the ants. And in return, the ants protect the caterpillars from predation. So I've just included now, I hope I'm not taking too long, I've just included some photos now of our late summer and autumn. And you can see how dynamic this landscape is. The grasses have done beautifully. I stopped counting at regenerating saplings. We've had over 85 regenerating red gums. And of course, they won't ever reach adulthood because, as I said, it's an open woodland. And what would ordinarily have happened is that they would be taken out by, by a fire sort of every 7 years or something, roughly is the estimation. But the significance of these photos is that what we have here now is we've got a landscape that's starting to engage in repair, really, where we're all about now focusing on restoring the original seed bank. And I include these photos because often people don't necessarily know what they're looking at. So given that we've socialized ourselves to look at industrial landscapes, sometimes people will look at this and think, oh, that's really messy. But I wanted to explain what's going on here for those who are unaware. And that is that what we're seeing here is we're seeing this beautiful process of seed production and repair. And those seeds will come to replace the weed seeds that would otherwise be covering the soil. And of course, all that vegetation as it starts to die down will protect the soils over the winter, which is what they're doing now. And will provide, all that seed will provide food in the late autumn and winter, as it has for native birds and other native animals. And I've just included some photos here of these beautiful species that are going to seed. And just one more little story about butterflies. So this is the common brown. And the park was full of these, along with other butterflies. And the reason I thought this might be interesting is because they have some native grasses that are their host plant. And basically last year in October, November, the park was full of male common browns. So you can tell they look different. And this particular one was spotted searching for a female, which hopefully he found. and after they mate, sort of probably 6 to 8 weeks after they've mated, the males die. And the females will hide in the grasses and wait until the first autumn rains. They hide in the grasses because, of course, as you can imagine, insects are very susceptible to heat. And so they lie in wait. And of course, if you mow everything down, then you'll get no more common browns. But they were able to lie in wait. And then we waited until autumn. And once the first autumn rains, good autumn rains came, all the girls realized that it was a good time because there would be the right conditions for their caterpillars. So they laid their eggs, and believe it or not, they are capable of basically postponing ovulation, delaying egg development until the conditions are right. And this speaks to, I suppose, the evolutionary process that the species had to accommodate in the past. And after, of course, she lays her eggs, then her life cycle comes to an end. And, she's in those grasses, and we'll see the common browns come out again in the spring. This is just the team. So only a small group of, I didn't know my neighbours, but obviously I know them very well now. So they're a very jovial bunch. And there's a core group of about 8 of us. And then what happened was a lot of other people started to descend on the project and did some wonderful work. And these are just shots from last year. This is just a quick summary of the methods that we used and some of our goals. These were low-cost, evidence-based revegetation techniques that we used, and there are numerous benefits that flow from this, and I've just listed them here, like cooling and mental health benefits, a reduction in noise and light pollution. There are lots of citizen science opportunities for members of the community here now. So, and I think I might have, one last point would be that over time, when you restore ecological relationships, and you delegate these jobs back to the creatures that evolved to do them, then you sort of start to look forward to only engaging in episodic interventions. And this is what the local Ngunnawal people did with their patch burning. And that's something that we're looking forward to doing here, to doing some patch burning. I'd be, I'm looking forward to that and documenting how that goes for various reasons. So now these methods are being applied to other sites. There are other members of the community that would like to do it, have the same results. And this is just a little summary of what we do, what I do when that happens, when people inquire. I just do like a baseline vegetation survey, look at assets and where they are. There are some challenges to doing a restoration in urban areas, but it's entirely possible, and the benefits are huge. So our local plant communities evolved over a wide climatic range, and that's really significant because sometimes I hear quite a bit of misinformation about where there's an attempt to try and create these sort of novel plant communities in urban areas. But the reality is that the local plant community is perfectly adapted because, as I showed you on the map earlier, it stretched all the way up to the south of Queensland. However, the health of our soils and how water moves across the landscape is instrumental to the functioning of our local plant, of any plant community, but certainly our local plant communities. And so those are things that have to be addressed. And we've also addressed that. So there's a small pilot that's going on at this project now that we were able to engage with roads, where we're now restoring an ephemeral creek. So what we found was natural regeneration of some of the original species some of them riparian, which tells us something about what was originally here. So we believe the area was probably a subsidiary of the original Western Creek. And I guess the message I would share is that while we've certainly modified and damaged our ecosystems, they're not beyond repair. And I think that the Fall Street Park is a good example of how rapidly we can turn things around. And that's inspiring a lot of people in the community around here to plant from the local plant community in their gardens, and to plant in ways that we can share with them that will assist with the issue of fragmentation that I mentioned earlier. And I just like to make this point because I think hopefully it's clear now the difference between a real forest and a fake forest, because real forests provide real services. And I just want to distinguish between, like, there's a lot of trends. I know that people seem to become excited about microforests or pocket forests or whatever, but these urban forestry strategies bear no relationship to the local geography here, to how much rain we got. It takes millions of years for plants to develop relationships with each other. And what we need to do, and what I'm advocating, is that we work with our local plant communities to protect, to create microenvironments that will protect us from climate change, and just produce the numerous benefits that come with a healthy environment. And we can do that together, and it has to be done landscape wide. And obviously the first thing we have to do is protect our mature and hollow bearing trees. We need to stop removing them because it's just simply not possible to replace them. And we need to change policies and practices when it comes to managing our public spaces. And we need to think of our gardens and parks and schools as sort of part of this wider landscape, and as genuinely part of the infrastructure in the place where we live. And that's it. So thanks very much for hearing me out.
Can I just say,